Jake Walker, a skilled mechanic and part-time explorer, had seen many strange things on his journeys, but this planet was something different. The alien world was covered in thick forests, its air heavy with the smell of unknown plants. He was on a trade mission, but when his ship started acting up, he had no choice but to land on the planet to make repairs. His tools scattered around him, Jake worked quietly under the ship's belly. He was used to fixing things in odd places. This wasn't the first time his ship had given him trouble. But as he worked, a strange sound drifted through the trees. It was soft at first, like a distant whisper, but it grew louder, almost like a cry for help. Jake stood up, wiping his hands on his pants, and listened. There it was again. It was a mix of desperation and urgency. He hesitated for a moment. Should he check it out? He didn't want to leave his ship out in the open for too long, but his curiosity got the better of him. Grabbing his flashlight and a small blaster for safety, Jake ventured into the woods, following the sound. The deeper he went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. Strange glowing plants illuminated the forest floor, casting eerie shadows. Every few steps, Jake heard the soft rustle of something moving, but he couldn't see what it was. After walking for several minutes, he reached a small clearing. There, kneeling on the ground, was a figure, an alien woman, her back turned to him. She was tall, her skin a pale blue that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. Her long silver hair flowed down her back, and she wore an elegant robe, though it was torn and dirty. She seemed distressed, searching for something on the ground. Jake cautiously approached, not wanting to startle her. "Hey," he called out, his voice calm but firm. "You okay? Need some help?" The alien woman turned her head sharply, her golden eyes narrowing as she looked at him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Jake could see the exhaustion on her face, but also a spark of determination. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice accented but clear. Her gaze flicked to the blaster in Jake's hand, and she tensed up. Jake quickly raised his hands to show he wasn't a threat. "I'm just a mechanic," he said, offering a friendly smile. "My ship's busted, and I landed nearby. I heard you. Well, I thought you might need help." The alien woman hesitated for a moment before letting out a sigh. I've lost something important," she said, her voice softening. "I don't know where it is, and I need to find it before it's too late." Jake tilted his head, curious. "What did you lose? Maybe I can help." She looked at him, her golden eyes filled with both doubt and hope. "It's a creature, my creature. It's very special to me and my people. If I don't find it soon, something terrible might happen." Jake scratched the back of his head. "A creature, huh? Well, I'm no expert on alien wildlife, but I've got a good set of eyes, and I know my way around tricky situations. I could help you look." The woman seemed to consider his offer for a moment before finally nodding. "I am Vesha," she said, standing up. "If you truly wish to help, then I'll accept your offer." Jake smiled. "I'm Jake. Let's find this creature of yours." Together, they set off deeper into the forest, the unknown dangers of the planet ahead of them. Jake couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. But one thing was for sure. This was going to be an adventure he wouldn't forget. Jake and Vesha moved through the forest in silence for a while, the thick alien foliage brushing against their clothes. The glowing plants lit their path, but it didn't make Jake feel any less on edge. He wasn't afraid of the forest itself. It was the unknown dangers lurking within that had his guard up. As they walked, Jake couldn't help but glance at Vesha. She moved gracefully, her silver hair flowing behind her, but he could see the tension in her posture. She was worried. Whatever this creature was, it clearly meant a lot to her. So Jake finally said, breaking the silence, "This creature of yours, what exactly is it?" Vesha glanced at him, her expression hard to read. It's called a Uraka. In my culture, they are rare and valuable. It's not just a pet. It's, it's more than that. Jake raised an eyebrow. More than that? Like, how important are we talking here? Vesha sighed, her shoulders slumping a bit. The Uraka has a special connection to the people of my race. It's bonded to me, and losing it would be seen as a sign of weakness. I cannot afford that, not now. Jake frowned. Why not now? Vesha hesitated before answering. I am a member of a royal family. My position is fragile, and there are those who would use any weakness to take advantage of me. If they find out I lost my Uraka, they could use it against me. Jake stopped in his tracks. Wait, you're royalty. Vesha nodded, her golden eyes meeting his. I didn't want to tell you at first, but yes. My family governs a large region on this planet. That's why I need to find my Uraka quickly. If my rivals discover this, they will strike. Jake whistled softly. Okay, that's a lot of pressure. But hey, don't worry. We'll find this thing. Vesha looked at him, surprised by his confidence. You're not worried. Even though you're involved in something that could turn into a political disaster. Jake shrugged with a grin. I've dealt with worse. Besides, helping people out is what I do. No point in worrying until things go wrong, right? Vesha's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. You humans, always so optimistic. Jake laughed lightly. Yeah, well, we try. So what does this Uraka look like? It'll help if I know what I'm searching for. Vesha described the creature as they walked. The Uraka was about the size of a small dog, with soft fur that shimmered like her silver hair. It had large, intelligent eyes and small wings that it could use to glide short distances. But most importantly, it had a strong bond with its owner, almost like it could sense her emotions. That's why Vesha was so desperate to find it. The Uraka would be frightened without her. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the terrain became more challenging. The trees grew taller, their thick roots twisting across the ground, making it difficult to walk. Jake had to use his hands to steady himself a few times as they climbed over obstacles. Vesha, despite her elegant appearance, was surprisingly agile, moving with ease through the difficult landscape. Suddenly, Vesha stopped, her golden eyes scanning the area. Do you hear that? Jake listened closely. There, faint but distinct, was a soft whimpering sound coming from up ahead. It was the same kind of sound he'd heard earlier, the one that led him to Vesha in the first place. That's it, she said, her voice urgent. That's my Uraka. Jake nodded, gripping his flashlight tightly. Let's go. They moved quickly toward the sound, their pace picking up as the whimpering grew louder. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees taller and more twisted than before. But neither of them hesitated. Finally, they reached a small clearing. In the center of it, trapped in a thick tangle of vines, was the creature. It was exactly as Vesha had described, small, with silver fur that shimmered in the light. Its large, terrified eyes locked onto Vesha the moment she stepped forward. My poor Uraka, she whispered, kneeling down beside it. Jake quickly stepped up to help. Hold on, we'll get you out of there. Together, they began working to free the creature, carefully untangling the vines. The Uraka trembled but didn't resist, as if it knew Vesha was there to help. After several tense minutes, they finally managed to free the creature. Vesha cradled it in her arms, her relief clear on her face. Thank you, she said softly, looking up at Jake. I don't know what I would have done without your help. Jake smiled, feeling a strange warmth at her gratitude. Hey, I told you I'd help. We're not done yet, though. We still have to get back. Vesha nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and something else, a trust that hadn't been there before. Together, they turned and began the journey back to safety, unaware of the dangers still lurking ahead. With the Uraka safely cradled in Vesha's arms, she and Jake began making their way back to the ship. The forest, which had felt eerie and mysterious earlier, now seemed more dangerous, as if unseen eyes were watching them. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Uraka let out a soft whimper, its silver fur shimmering faintly in the low light. Vesha gently stroked its head, whispering soothing words in her native language. She was clearly relieved to have found the creature, but there was still tension in the air, an unspoken concern. "What's bothering you?" Jake asked, keeping his voice low as they walked. Vesha glanced at him, her expression serious. "I'm worried that we're not alone. The longer we stay here, the more likely it is that someone will find out about the Uraka." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Hugon haven't seen anyone else out here." Vesha shook her head. "You don't understand. My family has enemies, rivals who would stop at nothing to see me fail. They may have been watching from the moment I landed. If they realize I lost the Uraka, they'll try to take advantage of the situation." Jake frowned, his grip tightening on his flashlight. "So you think someone's following us?" Vesha didn't answer immediately, but her silence spoke volumes. Jake scanned the surrounding trees, his instincts kicking in. He'd been in tight situations before, and his gut was telling him that this was about to become one of those times. He slowed his pace, listening closely to the sounds around them, the rustling leaves, the distant calls of alien creatures. But something was off. Then there it was, the faintest sound of footsteps, far too light to be his or Vesha's. Jake stopped, holding out a hand to signal Vesha to do the same. She looked at him, confused, but he motioned for her to be quiet. For a moment, the forest seemed still, almost peaceful. Then the footsteps came again, closer this time. "We're being followed," Jake whispered, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the shadows. Vesha's golden eyes widened, but she kept her composure. She shifted the Uraka in her arms, holding it closer as if to protect it. "What do we do?" she asked softly. Jake's mind raced. Running would make too much noise, and he had no idea how many of them there were or what they wanted. But hiding wasn't an option either. They needed to get back to the ship. Fast. "Stick close to me," Jake whispered, his voice calm but firm. "If something happens, I need you to head for the ship. I'll deal with whoever's out there." Vesha opened her mouth to protest, but Jake shot her a look that silenced her. "You are the priority here," he said. "You and the Uraka." Reluctantly, Vesha nodded, her grip on the creature tightening. Jake gave her a reassuring smile, though inside he was anything but calm. They moved forward again, this time at a quicker pace. Jake kept his eyes focused on the path ahead, but his ears were tuned to the sounds behind them. The footsteps had grown closer, almost too close. Whoever was following them was skilled at moving silently, but not silent enough. Suddenly, a figure darted out from behind a tree, moving swiftly toward them. Jake barely had time to react, his instincts kicking in as he raised his blaster. "Get down," he shouted to Vesha. She dropped to the ground just as a bolt of energy shot past her, narrowly missing her by inches. Jake fired back, the sound of his blaster echoing through the trees. The figure dodged, disappearing into the shadows, but Jake knew they weren't alone. More figures emerged from the darkness. There were at least 3 of them, maybe more. They were fast, their movements almost inhuman. Jake couldn't tell if they were armed, but their intent was clear. They were after Vesha. "Run," Jake shouted. Vesha hesitated for a split second, but then she turned and bolted in the direction of the ship. The Uraka clutched tightly to her chest. Jake fired another shot at the attackers, forcing them to scatter. He needed to buy her time, but there were too many of them. His heart pounded in his chest as he dodged behind a tree, trying to keep the attackers at bay. Whoever these people were, they weren't giving up easily. Jake fired another round, hitting one of the figures in the leg. The attacker cried out, falling to the ground, but the others kept coming. Jake knew he couldn't hold them off forever. He just hoped Vesha could make it back to the ship in time. Vesha sprinted through the forest, her heart pounding in her chest. The Uraka whimpered in her arms, but she held it tightly, refusing to let it go. She had no idea who was chasing them, but she knew one thing. She couldn't let them take her precious creature. Not after everything she had gone through to find it. Bridges scratched at her arms, and roots threatened to trip her, but she didn't stop. She could hear the sounds of blaster fire behind her, each shot sending a surge of fear through her. Jake was fighting them off, buying her time. She just hoped it was enough. The trees began to thin, and Vesha saw a glimpse of metal ahead, the outline of her ship. Relief washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by panic. She didn't have much time. Whoever those attackers were, they would catch up soon, and she needed to get the ship ready for takeoff. She skidded to a stop as she reached the ship, her fingers fumbling for the control panel on the side. Her hands were shaking, but after a few seconds, she managed to punch in the code. The hatch hissed open, and she darted inside, the Uraka still clutched to her chest. Almost there, she whispered to the creature, trying to calm both it and herself. She rushed to the cockpit, setting the Uraka down in the co-pilot seat before flipping a series of switches to power up the ship. The engines roared to life, but her mind was racing with worry. Jake was still out there, fighting to keep the attackers at bay. As the ship systems came online, Vesha activated the external cameras. She scanned the forest, her breath catching in her throat when she saw flashes of light in the distance. Jake was still holding them off, but he wouldn't last much longer. "Come on, Jake," she whispered, her hands hovering over the controls. "You have to make it." The Uraka let out a soft whimper, its large eyes reflecting the worry in Vesha's own. She reached out and stroked its fur, but her gaze stayed locked on the screen, watching as the figures in the forest moved closer to where Jake was. Suddenly, a shape burst out from the trees. It was Jake, running toward the ship at full speed. His blaster was still in his hand, and he fired back at the attackers as he ran, trying to keep them at bay. There were more of them now, at least 5, maybe 6, and they were closing in fast. Vesha's heart raced as she watched him. He was so close, but the attackers were right behind him. She couldn't just sit there and wait. She had to help. Without thinking, she grabbed the ship's onboard weapon system and aimed at the attackers. She wasn't much of a fighter, but desperation gave her focus. She fired a warning shot, the blast lighting up the forest as it struck the ground near the attackers. It wasn't a direct hit, but it was enough to make them scatter. Jake didn't hesitate. He sprinted the last few meters and dove into the ship just as the attackers regrouped. The hatch slammed shut behind him, and Vesha immediately lifted off, the ship rising into the air with a roar. For a moment, there was silence in the cockpit as both Jake and Vesha caught their breath. The Uraka nestled closer to Vesha, sensing the danger had passed, at least for now. Jake wiped the sweat from his brow, leaning back in the seat. "That was way too close," he muttered, still breathing heavily. Vesha nodded, her hands still gripping the controls tightly. "Who were they?" Jake shook his head. "No idea." "But they were after you. And the Uraka." Vesha's golden eyes darkened. "They were probably hired by one of my family's rivals. They've been waiting for a moment of weakness." Jake frowned. Why would they go to such lengths for this creature? The Yurakat is special, Vesha explains softly. It's not just a pet. It's a symbol of power in my culture. Whoever controls it has a claim to influence within the royal court. My rivals would do anything to take that from me. Jake looked at the small creature curled up in the seat. He didn't fully understand the alien politics at play, but one thing was clear. Vesha was in more danger than she'd let on. And now he was involved too. So what now? Jake asked. Vesha glanced at him, her expression serious. Now we get as far away from this planet as possible. As the ship soared through the atmosphere, leaving the forest and their pursuers behind, Jake couldn't help but feel like this was only the beginning of something much bigger. Whatever Vesha was caught up in, it was dangerous. And now there was no turning back. As the ship broke free of the planet's atmosphere, silence filled the cockpit. Vesha's fingers hovered over the controls, her golden eyes scanning the displays. Jake sat beside her, the blaster still in his hand, though his grip had loosened. The Uraka rested between them, its soft fur rising and falling with every breath. "We're clear," Vesha finally said, exhaling deeply. "They can't follow us now." Jake set the blaster down and rubbed his forehead. That was intense. "Who are these people after you? You mentioned rivals. Is it really all about this little guy?" He glanced at the Uraka, still confused about its importance. Vesha sighed and turned in her seat to face him. "It's more than just the Uraka. In my culture, it represents authority and control, especially within the royal court. My family has enemies who would stop at nothing to take away any claim we have to power. With the Uraka in their hands, they could challenge my family's position." Jake leaned back, processing what she had just said. "So this is political." Vesha nodded. "Very much so. By losing the Uraka, I was at risk of losing my standing among my people. It's not just a creature. It's a symbol, an ancient one. Whoever possesses it is seen as blessed by our ancestors." Jake frowned, still finding it hard to believe that such a small creature could hold so much importance. "And you think those people were hired by your rivals?" "I'm certain of it," Vesha replied, her voice firm. "They were well equipped and organized. Only someone with deep resources could afford to send a team like that." Jake rubbed the back of his neck, glancing out the cockpit window at the vastness of space. "So what now? Are they going to keep coming after you?" "Probably," Vesha admitted. "But for now, we've bought ourselves some time. They didn't expect us to escape so quickly." Jake felt a growing sense of unease. He had gotten caught up in something far more complicated than he had imagined when he first stumbled upon Vesha. "You're not telling me everything, are you?" Vesha was silent for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I didn't think you needed to know the full details. But now that you're involved, I suppose it's only fair." She paused, considering her words carefully. "I was supposed to return the Uraka to my family after its ritual ceremony. But when it went missing, my rivals saw an opportunity to strike. If they could capture me or the Uraka, they'd have leverage to make claims against my family's rule." Jake nodded slowly. "And now they know you have it again. They'll keep coming until they succeed." Vesha met his gaze, her expression serious. "Exactly. Which is why we need to stay one step ahead." Jake looked back at the small creature nestled between them. He could sense how much it meant to Vesha, not just for political reasons, but on a personal level too. "You care about this thing, don't you? It's not just about power." Vesha softened, her guarded exterior slipping for a moment. "The Uraka has been in my family for generations. It's more than just a symbol. It's a connection to my ancestors, to my heritage. I can't let them take that away." Jake nodded, understanding more now. "All right, so what's the plan? We can't just keep running forever." "We won't," Vesha said, her tone resolute. "There's a safe haven in a nearby system, an outpost where I have allies. If we can reach it, we can regroup and figure out our next move." Jake glanced at the navigation screen. "How far is it?" "Not far," Vesha replied, tapping a few keys to bring up the coordinates. "If we stay on course, we'll be there in a few hours." "Good," Jake said, relaxing a little. "But what happens when we get there? Won't your enemies follow us?" "They might," Vesha admitted, her eyes narrowing slightly. "But my allies will be ready. We're not alone in this." Jake gave a small nod, feeling a little reassured. "All right, let's get there and figure it out." As the ship soared through the black void of space, the tension between them eased, though neither of them was fully at peace. They were both aware that the danger was far from over. The enemies they had escaped from weren't going to give up easily, and whatever awaited them at the outpost could bring new challenges. But for now they had each other, and the mysterious Uraka, to keep safe. The ship hummed quietly as it cruised through the vast emptiness of space. Vesha and Jake sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The tension from the recent escape was still fresh, but for the moment, they had a reprieve. Vesha nodded, her eyes focused on the control panel. "We need to stay alert. Just because we've outrun them for now doesn't mean we're safe." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You think they'll find us out here? In the middle of nowhere?" Vesha didn't take her eyes off the screen. "They've tracked me this far. I wouldn't be surprised if they're trying again." Jake sighed, rubbing his face. "This just keeps getting better, doesn't it?" Suddenly, a warning light blinked on the console, and an alarm began to blare through the cockpit. Vesha's hands flew to the controls, her expression turning serious. "Incoming ships," she said quickly. "They found us." Jake's heart raced as he leaned forward to check the scanner. Several blips appeared on the screen, rapidly closing in on their position. "How many?" "3, Vesha replied, her voice tense. "Small fighters. They must have sent them ahead of the main ship." Jake cursed under his breath. "What do we do? Can we outrun them?" Vesha shook her head. "Not for long. Their ships are faster than ours." The cockpit was filled with the sounds of alarms and the hum of the ship's engine working overtime. Jake's mind raced, trying to think of a way out. "Can we fight them?" Vesha hesitated, glancing at the weapons system. "This ship isn't built for combat. We'd be outgunned." A sudden jolt rocked the ship as one of the enemy fighters fired a warning shot. "They're trying to force us to stop," Vesha said, her voice sharp. Jake clenched his fists. "If we stop, we're done for." Vesha's eyes darted across the controls as she adjusted their course. "We won't stop," she said firmly. "But we'll need to get creative." Another shot grazed the ship's hull, sending a shudder through the vessel. "They're closing in fast," Jake muttered, feeling the pressure mount. Vesha's fingers danced over the controls, her mind working quickly. "I've got an idea. Hold on." The ship suddenly veered sharply to the left, throwing Jake off balance in his seat. He grabbed the armrest to steady himself as Vesha pushed the ship's engines to their limit. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice raised over the noise. "There's a nearby asteroid field," Vesha explained, her eyes focused ahead. "If we can make it there, we can use the asteroids for cover. They won't be able to follow us as easily." Jake glanced out the cockpit window, seeing the distant shapes of the asteroid field coming into view. "That's a risky move." "It's our only chance," Vesha replied, her tone unwavering. The ship sped toward the asteroid field, the enemy fighters hot on their tail. Another barrage of laser fire whizzed past them, barely missing the ship's engines. "We won't make it at this rate," Jake shouted. Vesha's jaw tightened. "We will." As they neared the edge of the asteroid field, Vesha made another sharp turn, guiding the ship into the maze of rocks and debris. The enemy fighters followed, but their movements were slower and more cautious. "Stay low," Vesha instructed, her hands steady on the controls. "If we stay close to the larger asteroids, they'll have a harder time targeting us." Jake watched as the enemy ships struggled to keep up, dodging the massive rocks that floated through space. Vesha's skillful flying kept them just ahead of the danger, weaving between the asteroids with precision. Suddenly, one of the enemy fighters miscalculated its trajectory and collided with a large asteroid, exploding into a brilliant flash of light. Jake's eyes widened in shock. "One down," he muttered. Vesha didn't celebrate. 2 more to go. The remaining fighters continued to pursue them, but Vesha was relentless, maneuvering the ship in ways that kept them just out of reach. Another burst of laser fire shot past them, but the enemy ships couldn't land a direct hit. Then, without warning, Vesha pulled the ship into a sharp dive, heading straight for a cluster of asteroids. Jake's stomach lurched as the ship plummeted downward. "What are you doing?" he yelled. "Trust me," Vesha said through gritted teeth. At the last second, Vesha pulled up, narrowly avoiding the asteroids. One of the enemy ships tried to follow but wasn't fast enough. It crashed into the rocks and exploded, leaving only one fighter left. "We're almost clear," Vesha said, determination in her voice. Jake watched as the final fighter hesitated, then broke off its pursuit, retreating into the distance. "They're falling back," Jake said, relief flooding through him. Vesha nodded, though her expression remained serious. "For now, but they'll be back." As the ship continued through the asteroid field, Jake let out a long breath. They had escaped, but the danger wasn't over yet. As the ship glided through the last of the asteroid field, Jake felt the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. The pursuit had ended, at least for now, but he knew they weren't in the clear just yet. Vesha's eyes remained fixed on the controls, scanning for any sign of the remaining fighter. "We've bought ourselves some time, but they'll regroup," she said, her voice low. Jake nodded, glancing out of the cockpit window. The empty expanse of space stretched out before them, but he knew the calm was temporary. "What's the plan now? We can't just keep running forever." Vesha tapped a few buttons on the navigation console, bringing up a star map. "The outpost is still hours away, and we can't risk being caught in open space again." She paused, her gaze narrowing as she studied the map. "But there's a nearby system, an old mining colony. It's abandoned, but the terrain might give us cover." "Another hiding spot?" Jake asked, feeling the weight of the situation. They had been running for what felt like days now, and each narrow escape was wearing them both down. "It's not ideal, but it's better than getting caught out here." Vesha set a course, and the ship's engines hummed to life as they adjusted their heading. The minutes passed in silence, the stars outside blurring as the ship moved at full speed. Jake's thoughts drifted back to how this all started, the strange creature he'd found, the mysterious message, and now this high-stakes chase through space. He never imagined that helping an alien woman would lead him into this kind of adventure. Vesha broke the silence, her voice softer now. "You didn't have to help me, you know." Jake glanced over at her, surprised by this sudden change in tone. "It didn't feel right to leave you stranded," he said simply. "Besides, I think we make a good team." A small smile tugged at the corner of Vesha's lips, but it disappeared just as quickly. "You're different from the other humans I've met." Before Jake could respond, a flashing light on the control panel caught his attention. Vesha's expression darkened as she read the incoming transmission. "We're being hailed," she muttered, her fingers hovering over the controls. "By who?" Jake asked, his stomach tightening. "Not those fighters again, I hope." Vesha shook her head. No, it's a friendly signal, but it's from the old colony I mentioned. I thought it was abandoned. A sense of unease washed over Jake. Maybe it isn't as empty as we thought. Vesha hesitated for a moment, then accepted the transmission. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing an elderly alien woman with pale blue skin and deep, knowing eyes. She wore a simple robe, and her surroundings were dimly lit, suggesting she was in some hidden part of the mining colony. I was wondering when you'd arrive, the alien woman said, her voice calm and measured. Jake exchanged a confused glance with Vesha. Who are you? He asked. The woman's eyes focused on him, as if she knew him well. My name is Naira. I've been watching your journey, and I know why you've come. Naira smiled faintly, her gaze unwavering. This colony may be abandoned, but not by everyone. I've lived here for many cycles, keeping an eye on those who pass through. I see more than most. Jake narrowed his eyes, suspicion creeping into his mind. And what exactly do you want? Naira's smile grew warmer, as if she were amused by their wariness. I want to help you. You're being hunted, and I know a way to keep you safe. Vesha crossed her arms, clearly not convinced. Why should we trust you? We've had our fair share of surprises lately. Naira's expression softened, and she leaned closer to the holographic display. I understand your caution, but you must know that the forces chasing you are relentless. They will not stop until they capture you, or worse. But here on this colony, there are hidden places, forgotten passages that can shield you. Jake studied Naira carefully, trying to gauge whether she was telling the truth. What's in it for you? Why help us? Naira's eyes flicked to Vesha, her voice gentle. I've seen enough suffering in my lifetime. You carry something important, something that must not fall into the wrong hands. Helping you is the right thing to do. Vesha's gaze softened slightly, though her guard remained up. You've seen the creature. Naira nodded slowly. It is more than just a pet. It holds a key, one that many would kill for. Jake frowned, feeling the weight of Naira's words. This was no longer just about helping Vesha. It was something much bigger. And if we stay here, you can protect us. Naira inclined her head. For a time. But you must make your next move wisely. The longer you stay, the more dangerous it becomes. Vesha exhaled, glancing at Jake. We don't have much of a choice. With a nod, Jake agreed. They were running out of options, and Naira might be their best shot at surviving the ordeal. As Jake and Vesha's ship approached the old mining colony, they both felt a sense of unease. The colony loomed large in front of them, its abandoned structures casting long shadows across the asteroid's surface. The buildings were a mix of worn metal and stone, a testament to a time when this place had bustled with life. Now it seemed lifeless, save for the mysterious woman, Naira, who had offered them refuge. We're landing, Vesha said, her voice tense as she guided the ship toward the colony's main docking bay. I still don't fully trust her, but we're running out of options. Jake nodded, glancing at the colony as they descended. The place felt eerie, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Naira knew more than she was letting on. We don't have much of a choice. If she's right about those hunters, we'll need every advantage we can get. The ship landed with a soft thud, and the docking bay doors hissed open, revealing a dimly lit hallway leading into the heart of the colony. Vesha powered down the ship's systems and stood, grabbing a small device from the console. This will let us scan for any life forms nearby. Just in case Naira's not the only one here. Jake grabbed his gear and followed her down the ramp, his boots echoing in the empty bay. The cold air hit him, and the metallic scent of old machinery filled his lungs. The place felt like it hadn't seen life in years, but the deeper they went, the more alive it seemed. The faint hum of power systems running somewhere in the distance hinted that someone, or something, was keeping parts of the colony operational. "Stay alert," Vesha whispered as they entered a large chamber, the walls covered in old mining equipment. The dim lights flickered, casting long shadows across the room. Suddenly, a door at the far end of the chamber slid open, and Nairi appeared, her pale blue skin almost blending into the shadows. "You've arrived," she said with a soft smile, her voice carrying a calmness that seemed to settle the unease in the air. "Follow me. We don't have much time." Jake exchanged a glance with Vesha before they followed Nair deeper into the colony. She led them through a series of narrow corridors, the walls covered in dust and rust, as if the colony had been forgotten for ages. Yet as they moved further in, Jake noticed small signs of life, scattered tools, half-repaired panels, and faint footprints in the dust. Someone had been here, perhaps recently. Finally, they reached a large, reinforced door at the end of a long hallway. Naira placed her hand on a panel next to the door, and with a quiet hiss, it slid open to reveal a vast underground chamber. The chamber was unlike anything Jake had seen before. Rows of ancient technology lined the walls, glowing faintly with power. In the center of the room stood a strange circular platform, its surface etched with alien symbols. Vesha's eyes widened as she stepped into the room. "What is this place?" Naira stepped forward, her voice soft but filled with a deep knowledge. "This is an ancient teleportation hub, built by a long-forgotten civilization. It was designed to transport beings across vast distances, places no ship could reach. The creature you found, Vesha, carries the key to activating it." Jake looked at the creature resting in the small carrier they'd brought along. It stirred slightly, as if sensing the importance of the moment. "You're telling us that this creature can unlock this portal?" he asked, still trying to wrap his mind around the situation. Naira nodded. "The creature was bred by my people, long ago, to protect and control this technology. Only a few exist in the galaxy, and those who seek it, like the ones hunting you, know its value. If they capture it, they could use it to gain access to countless worlds, hidden from the rest of the galaxy." Vesha's expression hardened. "So we have to protect it at all costs." "Yes," Nara said, her eyes meeting Vesha's. "But more than that, you must decide how to use this power. The portal can take you anywhere in the galaxy, far beyond the reach of your enemies. But once you activate it, there's no coming back." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The weight of the decision pressed on him. They could escape, leave their pursuers behind, but they would be cut off from everything they knew. Before anyone could speak, the ground shook violently, and the chamber lights flickered. An alarm blared from the control panel on the wall. "They found us," Vesha said, her voice urgent. "We need to make a decision, now." The portal's light brightened, casting an eerie glow across the chamber. The hum of energy built steadily, reverberating through the ground. Jake, Vesha, and Naira stood at the edge of the platform, their eyes locked on the swirling vortex in front of them. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, a shimmering gateway to another part of the galaxy. "We need to move fast," Vesha said, her voice tight with urgency. "They're getting closer." Naira glanced at the control panel, her fingers dancing over the keys to maintain the portal's stability. "It's fully powered. But once you step through, I won't be able to follow. This is where we part ways." Jake felt a pang of uncertainty. Naira had guided them this far, her knowledge invaluable in keeping them one step ahead of the hunters. But the weight of their situation pulled him back to reality. There was no time for second-guessing. Vesha nodded firmly, taking the small carrier that held the creature and securing it to her side. "You've done enough, Naira. We won't forget what you've done for us." Nara's pale blue eyes softened as she gave a small nod. Just make sure the creature stays safe. It's more important than you know. Suddenly, the ground shook again, more violently this time. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the distant sound of metal clanking grew louder. The hunters had breached the colony, and they were getting closer. "They're here," Vesha shouted, her eyes wide with alarm. "We don't have time." Jake looked toward the entrance, his heart racing. The hunters were too close now. If they stayed any longer, they would be trapped. Without another word, he grabbed Vesha's hand and pulled her toward the portal. "We have to go now," Jake yelled over the rising noise. They rushed onto the platform, the energy crackling around them. The portal's light flickered, its surface swirling in a mesmerizing dance of colors. Just as they reached the center, a loud bang echoed through the chamber, the sound of the hunters forcing their way in. Jake turned to see figures in the distance, their shapes barely visible through the haze. They were moving fast, their weapons drawn. "Go," Nara shouted from the control panel, her voice barely audible over the noise. "I'll hold them off as long as I can." Jake felt a surge of panic as the hunters closed in, but he forced himself to focus. There was no turning back now. The portal shimmered in front of him, a path to safety, but also a leap into the unknown. "Hold on tight," Jake said to Vesha, his grip on her hand tightening. Together, they stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the portal. For a moment, everything went silent. The swirling light engulfed them, and the world around them dissolved into nothingness. It felt as though they were floating, suspended in time and space, with no sense of direction or gravity. Then with a sudden jolt, they were pulled forward, hurtling through the void. On the other side, the world came back into focus. Jake stumbled as his feet hit solid ground, the sudden change in surroundings disorienting him. He blinked, trying to adjust to the new environment. The air was warm, the sky above a brilliant shade of blue. Tall green trees surrounded them, their leaves swaying gently in the breeze. "We made it," Vesha breathed, her voice filled with awe. Jake looked around, his mind still spinning from the journey. They were no longer on the desolate colony. This place was alive, vibrant with nature. The danger they had left behind seemed like a distant memory. But even in the tranquility of this new world, Jake knew their journey wasn't over. Vesha knelt down and opened the carrier, letting the small creature out. It chirped softly, its large eyes blinking as it adjusted to its new surroundings. It seemed at peace here, as if this was where it truly belonged. "We're safe," Jake said, though a part of him wondered how long that safety would last. For now, at least. Vesha stood beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon. "This place, it's beautiful, but we can't let our guard down. We don't know who, or what, might be out there." The creature let out a contented trill, circling around their legs before hopping onto a nearby rock. It seemed to be leading them, guiding them towards something. "Looks like it knows where it's going," Jake said with a small smile. "Maybe we should follow it." Vesha chuckled softly, her tension easing. "For once, we're not being chased. Let's see where this new journey takes us." Together, they followed the creature deeper into the forest, the weight of their past slipping away with each step. They didn't know what the future held, but they had each other. And for now, that was enough. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground, Jake glanced at Vesha. They had survived the impossible, and though their path was uncertain, he knew one thing for sure. Their story was far from over.